You know, when Keir Starmer stood on that stage in July 2024, fresh from his landslide victory, he promised us change, he promised us integrity, he promised us that Labour would be different, that they'd learn from their mistakes, that they'd root out the toxicity, the prejudice, the old boys' club mentality that had plagued British politics for far too long. And we believed him, or at least some of us wanted to believe him. We thought, perhaps naively, that after 14 years in opposition, Labour might have used that time for genuine reflection. For real change. How wrong we were. Because what we've discovered in recent months isn't just disappointing. It's not just another political misstep or a bit of poor judgment. What we've uncovered is a pattern of behaviour so toxic, so deeply embedded in the culture of Starmer's Labour Party, that it's now impossible to deny. This Prime Minister has presided over one of the most scandal-ridden governments in modern British history, and we're barely 18 months in. Let me take you through what's been happening, because if you've been trying to keep up with the news, you might feel like you're watching a particularly dark political drama. Except this isn't fiction. This is real. This is our government. It starts with something called the Trigger Me Timbers WhatsApp group. Now, just pause on that name for a moment. Trigger Me Timbers. It's a joke, isn't it? A pun on shiver me timbers, mixed with that word triggered that certain people love to throw around when they want to mock genuine concerns about discrimination or abuse. The very name tells you everything you need to know about the mindset of the people in this group. This wasn't just any old WhatsApp chat. This was a group that included Labour MPs, councillors from Tameside and Stockport, people who were supposed to be public servants, people who were supposed to represent their communities with dignity and respect. Instead, what did they do? They exchanged nearly 40,000 messages over 3 years. 40,000. Let that sink in. And in those messages, they did what exactly? They mocked their constituents. They made racist jokes about Diane Abbott, Britain's first black woman MP. They made anti-Semitic remarks. They made homophobic slurs. They made misogynistic comments about Angela Rayner. They even joked about a pensioner being mown down by a lorry because she'd complained about bin collections. Yes, you heard that right. A pensioner complained about bin collections, and these Labour politicians, these supposed champions of working people, joked about her being killed. Andrew Gwynn, who was a health minister in Starmer's government, was right in the thick of it. He made jokes about people sounding too Jewish. He participated in conversations that were so vile, so utterly reprehensible, that when they finally leaked in February 2025, he was sacked within hours. And here's the thing. Gwynn wasn't some rogue operator. He wasn't a lone bad apple. He was joined by Oliver Ryan, now the MP for Burnley, and 11 councillors. These weren't fringe figures. These were people at the heart of the Labour machine in Greater Manchester. When the scandal broke, what did they say? Oh, they were sorry. They regretted their badly misjudged comments. They claimed they didn't see every message, the usual playbook. But here's what none of them could explain. If you're in a WhatsApp group where people are making racist jokes, anti-Semitic slurs, and fantasizing about constituents being killed, and you don't leave that group, what does that say about you? It says you're complicit. It says you're comfortable with that behavior. It says that for all your public pronouncements about equality and respect behind closed doors, you think it's all a bit of a laugh. Now, you might say, well, that's just a few bad apples in local government. Starmer couldn't have known about all that. Except, here's the problem. The culture clearly goes right to the top. Because while the Trigger Me Timbers scandal was unfolding, we learned about another set of leaked messages. These ones involved Paul Ovenden, who wasn't a local councillor in Tameside. He was the director of strategy in Downing Street, one of Starmer's most senior advisors, one of the handful of people earning over £100,000 a year to shape government policy and communications. And what did Paul Ovenden do? Back in 2017, When he was a Labour press officer, he sent messages on Labour's internal system describing in graphic, sexually explicit detail conversations about Diane Abbott. We're talking about descriptions of sex toys, sex acts, utterly degrading material. Material so vile that when it finally came to light in September 2025, he had no choice but to resign. But here's what's really telling. These messages had been sitting in a leaked cache from 2020. The Labour Party knew about them, the BBC knew about them, Channel 4 knew about them. And yet, through the entire election campaign, through Overton's appointment as Director of Strategy, through his elevation to one of the most powerful positions in Downing Street, nobody said a word. It was only when someone finally leaked the story to the Daily Mail that action was taken. Not because Labour wanted to do the right thing, but because they got caught. And when Overton resigned, what did he say? He called it a silly conversation from nearly a decade ago. He complained that it was chilling that a private conversation could do this sort of damage. Private conversation, as if the problem was that people found out, not what he actually said. This is the mentality we're dealing with. This is the culture in Starmer's Labour Party. Diane Abbott herself pointed out that these weren't isolated incidents. She said the Paul Overton messages reflected the general thinking of too many of the people around Starmer. And you know what? She's right, because we've seen it again and again. Remember the leaked Labour report from 2020 that showed senior party officials openly plotting against Jeremy Corbyn's leadership? That same report described Diane Abbott in terms of visceral disgust with language that drew on racist tropes. And those people? Many of them are still in the party. Many of them are still influential. This is a pattern. This is a culture. And Keir Starmer either knew about it and did nothing, or he didn't know about it, which means he has no control over his own operation. But it gets worse, because we're not just talking about WhatsApp groups from years ago. We're talking about decisions Starmer has made as Prime Minister. In December 2024, Starmer appointed Peter Mandelson as UK Ambassador to the United States. Now, Mandelson is a Labour grandee. He's the Prince of Darkness, the ultimate political operator. But he's also someone who had maintained a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender, even after Epstein's conviction. This wasn't a secret. Mandelson's relationship with Epstein was public knowledge. And yet Starmer thought, yes, this is the man to represent Britain in Washington. When the appointment was announced, there were questions, there were concerns, but Starmer pressed ahead. And then, in September, more emails emerged showing that Mandelson had sent supportive messages to Epstein, even suggesting that his conviction should be challenged. Starmer had no choice but to sack him. But the damage was done, because either Starmer knew about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein and didn't care, or he didn't bother to do proper due diligence before appointing someone to one of the most important diplomatic posts in the world. And then, just last month, more Epstein files were released by the US Department of Justice. These showed that Mandelson's ties to Epstein went deeper than anyone had realized. There were suggestions that Mandelson had passed sensitive government information to Epstein. A police investigation was launched. The fallout was swift and devastating. Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's chief of staff, the man many credited with masterminding Labour's election victory, resigned. He took full responsibility for advising Starmer to appoint Mandelson. The next day, Tim Allen, Starmer's communications chief, quit. That made 4 directors of communications in just 18 months. And then came the moment that really shook Westminster. Anas Sarwar, the leader of Scottish Labour, held a press conference and called for Starmer to resign. Let me repeat that. The leader of Scottish Labour, a senior figure in the party, publicly called for the Prime Minister to step down. Sarwar said there had been too many mistakes, and that the distraction needs to end, and the leadership in Downing Street has to change. Think about what that means. Think about the level of crisis required for the leader of Scottish Labour to break ranks like that. This wasn't some backbencher causing trouble. This was a party leader saying, publicly, that the Prime Minister had to go. For a few hours on Monday, February 9th, it looked like Starmer might actually fall. The mood in Westminster was febrile. Journalists were camped outside Downing Street. MPs were frantically WhatsApping each other. There were rumours that cabinet ministers might resign. And then, slowly, the cabinet rallied. David Lammy pledged his support. Rachel Reeves backed the Prime Minister. Even Angela Rayner, who many saw as a potential leadership rival, came out and said Starmer had her full support. That evening, Starmer addressed Labour MPs and peers. He gave what observers described as a pugnacious speech. He said he'd won every fight he'd ever been in. He said he wasn't prepared to walk away from his mandate. And for now, he's survived. But at what cost? The opinion polls are catastrophic. Labour is behind Reform UK. Behind them, a party that's been absolutely imploding with its own scandals is still more popular than the government. Starmer's personal approval ratings are the lowest of any Prime Minister at this stage of their tenure in modern history. More importantly, trust is gone. When people see these WhatsApp messages, when they see the Diane Abbott comments, when they see the Epstein connection, when they see the parade of resignations and sackings, they draw a conclusion. This government is not what it promised to be. Starmer stood in front of the country and said he would restore integrity to public life. He said he would be different. He said he would root out prejudice and misconduct. Instead, he's presided over a government where racism, misogyny, and anti-Semitism flourish behind closed doors, where senior advisors make sexually explicit comments about MPs, where ministers joke about constituents being killed, where the Prime Minister appoints someone with ties to a convicted sex offender to one of the most important roles in government. And here's what really galls me, the hypocrisy. Because this is the same Keir Starmer who spent years going after Boris Johnson for Partygate. The same Keir Starmer who demanded Johnson's resignation over WhatsApp messages. The same Keir Starmer who said the Conservative government had lost its moral authority. Well, let me ask you, what moral authority does Starmer have now? When your own Scottish party leader is calling for you to resign, when you've been through 4 communications directors in 18 months, when your chief of staff has quit, when members of your government have been exposed making racist and misogynistic comments, when you've appointed someone with ties to Jeffrey Epstein to represent Britain abroad, what right do you have to lecture anyone about standards in public life? The answer is none. And let's talk about what this means practically. Because this isn't just about political point scoring. This affects real people's lives. We've got a government that's in constant crisis mode. Instead of focusing on the cost of living, on NHS waiting lists, on the economy, on defence, Downing Street is in permanent damage control. They're firefighting scandal after scandal. Civil servants who should be working on policy are instead drafting statements about why the Prime Minister shouldn't resign. Ministers who should be in their departments are instead giving interviews defending Starmer. The whole machinery of government is being consumed by this chaos. And meanwhile, what's happening in the country? Well, people are struggling. Energy bills remain high. Taxes have gone up. The NHS is still in crisis. But we're not talking about any of that because we're too busy talking about another leaked WhatsApp group or another resignation. This is what happens when you elect a government that talks about change but doesn't actually believe in it. This is what happens when the people at the top think the rules don't apply to them. This is what happens when there's a fundamental disconnect between what politicians say in public and what they say in private. The leaked messages from that internal Labour WhatsApp group about Starmer himself are particularly telling. In January, a Labour MP texted about how Starmer had posted a message in the 2024 MPs group praising himself for a TV interview. And how many reactions did it get? 5. In 5 hours. from his own MPs. Meanwhile, a message wishing someone happy birthday got more engagement. That tells you everything about how Starmer is viewed by his own party. These are the people who were selected specifically for their loyalty to him. These are the 2024 intake, the Starmerites, and they can't even be bothered to react to his messages. Now, let's talk about what comes next. Because Starmer might have survived this immediate crisis, but his position is fundamentally weakened. There are elections coming in May. Scottish elections, Welsh elections, local council elections across England, and all the polling suggests Labour is going to get hammered, absolutely hammered. In Scotland, they're predicted to lose badly to the SNP again. In Wales, they could slip to third place. In local elections across England, they're going to lose hundreds of seats. And when that happens, when the results come in and show massive Labour losses, what happens then? Will the party still rally behind Starmer? Will cabinet ministers still pledge their full support when their own seats look vulnerable? I doubt it. Because here's the thing about political loyalty. It's contingent. It's based on the belief that your leader can win. And right now, Starmer doesn't look like a winner. He looks like a liability. There are already rumours about who might replace him. Angela Rayner, despite her own tax scandal. Wes Streeting, the health secretary, who's been conspicuously visible lately. Even Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, who's been positioning himself as the voice of Northern Labour. The problem for all of them is timing. Nobody wants to be the one who wields the knife. Nobody wants to be seen as the person who brought down the Prime Minister. But equally, nobody wants to go down with the ship. So we're in this strange limbo where everyone knows Starmer is fatally wounded, but nobody wants to deliver the final blow. It's like watching a very slow-motion car crash. You know what's going to happen, but you can't look away. And here's what I find most frustrating about all of this. It didn't have to be this way. Labour had an opportunity. They had a huge majority. They had goodwill from voters who were desperate for change after 14 years of Conservative government, some of which, I'll admit, had its own serious problems. They could have come in and actually delivered. They could have been competent. They could have been scandal-free. They could have focused on the issues that matter to ordinary people. Instead, they brought all their baggage with them. All the factionalism, all the behind-the-scenes nastiness, all the WhatsApp groups filled with bile, all the questionable appointments, all the hypocrisy. They thought that because they were in power, they could get away with it. But they were wrong. Because in the age of leaks, nothing stays private forever. Those WhatsApp messages always come out. Those emails always surface. Those skeletons in the closet always rattle. And when they do come out, you're faced with a choice. You can own it, apologize genuinely, and make real changes. Or you can try to minimize it, blame others, and hope it goes away. Starmer has chosen the latter, every single time. When the Trigger Me Timbers scandal broke, he suspended people and hoped it would blow over. When the Paul Ovenden messages leaked, he accepted the resignation and put out a statement. When Mandelson became toxic, he sacked him and tried to move on. But none of it's working. Because people aren't stupid, they can see the pattern. They can see that these aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a deeper rot. And that rot is this. Starmer's Labour Party is full of people who say one thing in public and another in private, who talk about equality and respect but make racist jokes when they think nobody's listening, who lecture others about integrity while appointing people with appalling judgment to senior positions. The tragedy is that there are good people in the Labour Party. There are MPs who genuinely believe in public service, who work hard for their constituents, who do try to make a difference. But they're being let down by a leadership that's either complicit in this toxic culture or too weak to root it out. Take Diane Abbott. Whatever you think of her politics, she's been subjected to an absolutely disgraceful level of abuse. Racist abuse, sexist abuse, abuse from within her own party. And when she's spoken out about it, when she's said that Starmer's leadership reflects a certain mentality, she's been suspended again. That tells you everything about the priorities of this government. They're more concerned with silencing critics than addressing the underlying problems. The same thing happened with the Trigger Me Timbers whistleblowers. The people who leaked those messages faced more scrutiny than the people who sent them. Think about that. The scandal wasn't that Labour politicians were making racist jokes. The scandal, according to some in the party, was that someone dared to expose it. This is the mindset we're dealing with. This is a government that's more worried about managing its image than actually being better. And you can see this in how they've responded to the Epstein scandal. Instead of asking the fundamental question, why did we appoint someone with these connections to such an important position? They've tried to make it about Morgan McSweeney. One man takes the fall, and everyone else carries on. But McSweeney didn't make that decision in a vacuum. Starmer signed off on it. The cabinet knew about it. They all went along with it. And now they're all trying to pretend they were blindsided, that they didn't know the full extent of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. Except we know that's not true, because Mandelson's connection to Epstein was reported in the media years ago. It was discussed during his appointment. There were articles written about it. But they thought they could weather the storm. They thought people wouldn't care that much. They were wrong, because people do care. People care when their Prime Minister shows such catastrophically poor judgment. People care when the government that promised to restore integrity turns out to be just as sleazy and scandal-ridden as the one it replaced. And that's ultimately what this is about. Not just the individual scandals, as bad as they are, but the broken promise. The fundamental betrayal of the trust voters placed in Labour when they gave them that massive majority. Starmer promised to be different. He promised to be the adult in the room. He promised to restore standards, and he's failed, comprehensively, utterly failed. The leaked WhatsApp messages, the racist jokes, the sexist comments, the Epstein connection, the parade of resignations, these aren't just embarrassing headlines. They're evidence that nothing has really changed, that the same old patterns of behavior, the same old tolerance for the intolerable, the same old protection of the in-group, all still exist. The only difference is that now it's Labour doing it instead of the Conservatives. And maybe that's the real scandal. Maybe the real story here is that for all the talk of change, for all the promises of a new politics, we've ended up with more of the same. Different faces, same failures. The tragedy is that Britain deserves better than this. We deserve a government that can focus on actually governing rather than managing scandals. We deserve leaders who practice what they preach. We deserve a political culture where racist jokes in WhatsApp groups end careers immediately, not after months of investigation. Where appointing someone with ties to a convicted sex offender is obviously disqualifying, not something you try to brazen out. But we don't have that. What we have is Keir Starmer, clinging on to power despite having lost the confidence of his own Scottish party leader. Despite having the lowest approval ratings of any Prime Minister in modern history, despite presiding over a government that lurches from scandal to scandal. And the really damning thing, it's only been 18 months. 18 months. And we've already had all of this. What's going to happen over the next 3.5 years? How many more leaked WhatsApp groups are out there? How many more questionable appointments? How many more resignations? I genuinely don't know if this government will make it to the next election. The May elections could be the trigger. A catastrophic performance in Scotland, Wales, and the local elections could give his critics the ammunition they need to move against him. Or he might limp on, wounded but stubborn, until the inevitable happens. Because here's the thing, Starmer can survive in the narrow sense. He can cling to office, he can keep issuing statements and reshuffling his team, but he can't recover from this. You don't recover from your own party leader calling for your resignation. You don't recover from being behind Reform UK in the polls. You don't recover from this level of scandal and chaos. The damage is done. The trust is broken. And no amount of communication directors or defensive speeches or cabinet reshuffles can fix that. Which brings me back to where I started. Starmer promised change. He promised integrity. He promised to be different. The leaked messages show us the truth. They show us what this government really is behind the carefully managed press conferences and the rehearsed sound bites. They show us the jokes they make about constituents, the way they talk about black MPs, the appointments they make despite obvious red flags, the culture of impunity they've created. And once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. Once those WhatsApp messages are out there, once those emails are public, once the pattern is clear, there's no going back. Keir Starmer can survive this week. He might survive the next few months, but politically, he's finished. The authority is gone. The mandate is squandered. The promise of change has been revealed as hollow. And that, ultimately, is why it's too late for him to fix this. Because fixing it would require admitting the scale of the problem. It would require genuine accountability, real consequences, fundamental change to the culture of his party and his government. And everything we've seen suggests he's not willing to do that. He's going to try to manage it, minimize it, move on from it. But you can't move on from this. These leaked messages are a window into the soul of this government. And what we've seen there is ugly, hypocritical, and damning. The only question now is how long it takes for everyone else to reach the same conclusion that Anas Sarwar already has, that this Prime Minister has to go. Not because of one scandal, but because of the pattern they represent. Not because of one WhatsApp group, but because of the culture that allowed it to flourish. Not because of one bad appointment, but because of the judgment that thought it was acceptable. Keir Starmer promised to restore integrity to public life. Instead, he's shown us that the rot goes deeper than we ever imagined. And those leaked messages, they're not going to go away. They're going to define his premiership. They're going to be what people remember when they look back at this government. The mask has slipped. And what's underneath is far worse than anyone expected.